One line, "Mom, go to the kitchen," rang out across the dinner table, drier than a loaf of expired bread. 5 minutes later, guess who walked in? The man business magazines call the market mover, and tonight, he moved the entire room. But before that door even opened, something inside me had already cracked. I keep rewinding to that exact snap, so you'll understand why I stood up. That night, the chandelier in the Brooks dining hall spilled light over a long table like it was designed to pamper those used to being served. I leaned against the railing, trying to breathe deep the way I used to coach clients back when I worked in crisis PR. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6. The irony? My life was the real crisis. You know, the kind of family where everyone wears a ring so shiny it could double as a mirror? That's my in-laws. Perfectly tailored suits, glittering gowns, smiles straight out of a luxury real estate brochure in Chicago. And then there's my mom, Linda, wearing polished closed-toe pumps and a light brown coat I begged her to buy because it'll look good in photos. She clutched the gift for the Brooks' 50th anniversary, a photo album she put together herself, filled with prints from the corner Photoshop, edges slightly curled from over-drying. I heard Judith, my mother-in-law, let out a laugh so thin it could snap. "Oh my, how adorable." Handmade. The word adorable from Judith always carried the scent of a charity museum piece, something admired in passing, then shelved away in storage. "Savannah, have your mom head down to the kitchen." Aaron, my husband, didn't exactly raise his voice, but loud enough for the nearby guests to catch it. "The chef's struggling with the roast. Your mom knows her way around it." He lifted his glass like a director calling cut after a perfect scene. My throat went dry, like the whole room had suddenly cranked the heat to max. Mom blinked, then offered the kind of peacekeeping smile only someone who's worked night shifts her whole life can manage. "If you need an extra hand." She didn't even finish the sentence before turning toward the door. Judith chimed in. "Wonderful. Impressive how quick you still are at your age." It landed like she was welcoming a brand new volunteer. Ever read a Reddit post about that moment when you suddenly realize you're the outsider? I once came across one. The writer said family dinners can feel like a stage play, where you get cast as background without anyone asking. Standing there, I felt my hands shake like I was holding a mic in front of an audience. Except the mic was off. Back when I worked in PR, I always told clients, in a crisis, don't rush to speak. Start by asking questions. Yet right then, the only question looping in my head was, why did I let them treat my mom like that? I followed her into the side kitchen. The air smelled of herbs and sizzling butter, and the chef looked at my mom like she was some clueless intern. "Slice up 2 trays of potatoes," he said, "and wipe down the counter while you're at it." Mom nodded, rolled up her sleeves. The stitching had come loose a bit, exposing the lining underneath. If work could reveal a person's soul, my mom was built for a patient winter, standing in the cold on someone else's porch, waiting until they needed her to knock. "Let's switch, I'll do it." I reached for the knife. Mom gently pulled my hand down. "Don't. This is your husband's family's house." That word, house, hit heavy, like one of those decorative stones sunk in the garden pond. I wanted to say, no matter whose house it is, you still show respect to elders. But the words stuck in my throat. Out in the other room, glasses clinked. Aaron was telling some story, his booming laugh pulling a chorus of laughter with it. I could already guess the punchline would end with something like, "My mother-in-law is," because he always needed someone else as the setup. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Mia, my best friend, the kind who'd show up with a blanket if you said the night felt cold. "You okay? That company livestream was impressive, but your face didn't look okay. Girl, consider sprinting." I let out a quiet laugh. "Consider sprinting." Translation, run. What are you waiting for? I typed back, "My mom's in the kitchen. They asked her to help." Mia replied instantly, "Help while she's a guest? Excuse me?" Then she added, "If you need a plot twist, text me. I specialize in playing the kind villain." Have you ever watched someone you love, like my mom, get pushed down a level, like sliding a bar lower on a chart? In that moment, I realized my old job hadn't really left me. I started analyzing the power structure. Who sat closest to the center of the table? Who initiated the conversation? Who waited until the last second just to nod? All of it pieced together into a perfect storyboard of what it feels like to be seen as less important. Back in the dining room, I walked past Judith showing off her vintage necklace from the 60s. She shot me a glance, her smile sharp as a cake knife. "Savannah, Check on the kitchen for me, will you? Don't let me be responsible for that mess." She dropped her voice on those last two words as if they might stain her gloved hand. I stood beside Aaron. He didn't look at me, just lifted his glass and added to his story. The best thing about a family is everyone knows their proper place. The table erupted in laughter. A man chimed in, "So rare these days, family discipline." What I heard in the word discipline was the sound of a trapdoor slamming shut. If you've made it this far, be honest. What strikes you as more wrong here? Me for staying silent too long, or them for being too used to being served? Comment and let me know. I need an outsider to hold up the mirror. I went back to the kitchen again. Mom slid the tray of potatoes into the oven, then dabbed her temple with a paper napkin. She looked up and caught my eyes. No blame, just tired. The kind of tired that comes from spending a lifetime trying not to bother anyone. Something inside my chest snapped, crack, like a piece of cardboard bent in half. There's a scene in an indie film I love. The main character sits in the middle of a fancy dinner, everyone laughing and chatting, while her inner voice sounds like static on a broken radio. The director doesn't add music, just silence. Tonight I heard that exact same silence. I pulled out my phone. In my contacts, there was a name faded like an old photo, Grayson, my brother. The one who vanished off the map of my life when I was 18. Over the years I'd given him a dozen excuses, busy, angry, reinvented, forgetful. Or maybe he just didn't want to return to a place so poor, we used to count pennies. My finger hovered over his name. I didn't draft a speech, I didn't ramble. As someone who once taught clients that a good message has to be clear and concise, just type 3 words. Hey, help me. I didn't know if the number still worked. I didn't know if the person on the other end even remembered the little sister who used to snap pencils during blackout nights. I didn't know. But I hit send. Behind me, the dining room erupted in applause for another toast. Aaron clinked his glass again, the light catching the crystal like the closing shot of a Perfect Life commercial. I watched my mom place a hand on her chest, drawing in a deep breath, like a seasoned swimmer bracing for the coldest stretch of water. If you've ever read one of those Reddit stories titled something like Rich Family versus My Mom, tell me, what kind of ending satisfies you most? A fist slammed on the table, or a quiet reversal so sharp everyone's shame echoes in the silence? Drop it in the comments. I'm searching for a way out. As I slipped my phone back into my pocket, it buzzed. A new message lit up the screen. Not Mia, not the old school parent group, just 4 words, enough to jolt my pulse. Tomorrow I'll come. When my phone lit up with the words, "Tomorrow I'll come," I could barely breathe. It was like someone yanked open a stage curtain that had been collecting dust for over a decade. And just like that, I was pulled back to where it all began. Detroit. The city of roaring factories and dreams that rusted too easily. As a kid, I used to joke, our alarm clock was the sound of a sewing machine. But it wasn't really a joke. My mom, Linda, worked the night shift at a garment factory. She'd come home just as the sun was rising, hands still dusted with stray threads. And still, she'd pour bowls of cereal for me and Grayson, soggy as sponges by then, murmuring, "Eat up, it'll make you smart," while her eyelids sagged from exhaustion. If there were an Oscar for moms who know how to hide exhaustion behind a smile, Linda would have swept Best Actress 18 years straight. I can still picture her kicking off worn-out shoes, rubbing her aching feet, yet still asking me how school was. And what was school really, besides long bleach-scented hallways and ceiling fans that squeaked? But she genuinely wanted to hear. That was her survival tactic. Clinging to the hope that we'd escape the block where the streetlights had been dead for years, and no one bothered to replace them. Grayson was different. From the start, he refused to stand on the same starting line as everyone else. While other kids dreamed of being basketball stars or famous rappers, Grayson was flipping through business magazines he'd pulled from office dumpsters. I remember him standing in our kitchen, barely the size of a closet, pointing at our rickety wooden table and saying, "One day, Savannah will be sitting in the boardroom, not cleaning it." I burst out laughing, convinced he was just binging too many movies. But in his eyes back then, God, it wasn't a joke. It was a blood oath. Then, when I was 18, Grayson got a full scholarship abroad. The whole neighborhood crowded onto our porch to celebrate. Mom cried while baking an apple pie, the kind that always burned at the edges because the oven leaked gas. I remember when he hugged me, my nose full of the sweat from his cheap gym shirt, and he whispered, "Wait for me. I'll come back, and we'll never have to count pennies again. It sounded romantic, like the trailer for some holiday family movie. But that trailer never turned into a film. Grayson disappeared. At first, there were handwritten letters, then emails, then only a few scattered holiday calls. And then, silence. Silence as dead as the broken fridge humming in the corner of our kitchen. My mom still believed, he's just busy, sweetheart. Successful people always have packed schedules. She even bought an extra chair for the dining table, calling it Grayson's spot, setting it every night like he might walk through the door. But to me, that empty chair felt like a joke that had gone on too long. To me, he'd abandoned us. Left Mom with her calloused hands, left me with long nights listening to rats scratching inside the walls. I once snapped at her. Why do you keep believing? Maybe he just doesn't want to come back. Mom only patted my head, smiling tiredly. Some promises, Savannah, people keep with their whole lives, not just with messages. Maybe she was right. But I didn't have that kind of patience. I chose to forget him. And then, just when life was stuck in black and white like an old documentary, Aaron Brooks walked in. I met Aaron at a communications industry seminar. I was scribbling notes in a beat-up notebook when a man in a suit stepped over, handed me his business card, and said in a perfectly confident tone, "Savannah, right? I caught your presentation. Really impressive." To this day, I'm still not sure if he actually listened to a word I said or just noticed, because my hair was dyed fire red at the time. Aaron had a gift for turning small talk into something that felt like a birthday present. He asked me what I dreamed of, and when I awkwardly admitted I just wanted a stable life, one where I didn't have to stress over the electric bill every month, he smiled like a toothpaste ad and said, "I'll give you a life you deserve." It sounded like a cheesy line from some online romance novel. But you have to understand, I came from a place where luxury meant having enough gas money to make it to Friday. Aaron's promise back then felt like a VIP ticket out of Detroit. He took me to fancy lunches where the tablecloths were whiter than my future. He drove me along the river in his convertible, the wind tossing my hair like I was in a shampoo commercial. For a girl used to crammed city buses, it felt like I'd flipped the channel from a gritty documentary to a luxury reality show. And when Aaron got down on one knee during a trip, diamond ring glittering under the city lights, it took me half a second to say yes. We married after just 14 months of dating. Fast, like snatching a Black Friday deal without ever reading the return policy. If you're thinking, wow, that was fast, you're right, I should have thought so too. But back then, there was only one voice in my head. This is the only way not to end up like Mom. If on my wedding day I thought I was walking into a castle, 5 years later that castle turned out to be a prison, just with shinier chandeliers and bigger windows. Right after the wedding, Aaron laid down the law. I had to quit my job. He sweetened it like sugar. You don't need to work so hard anymore. A lawyer's wife should focus on family and social events. It sounded as romantic as a diamond bracelet commercial, but in reality it was like being laid off with zero severance. 1 week after handing in my resignation, I realized I'd been downgraded from PR professional to smiling doll, on cue for the right laughs and nods. Aaron managed everything from my clothes to my friends. Red looks too bold. Wear navy, it's safer. Or, I don't like you hanging out with Mia, she's too blunt, doesn't fit our family's style. And I thought, oh, so even friendships need to go through an approval process like a loan application. As for his family, they had a whole playlist of jabs lined up for me. During brunch, Judith would often raise her glass and laugh. Savannah is so lucky. Without Aaron, she'd probably still be clacking away on a keyboard in some tiny office. Everyone would nod in unison, like they'd just watched a TED Talk too convincing to question. I wanted to say, excuse me, since when is a small office not a life worth living? But instead, I smiled, because Brooks wives, aren't allowed to tell the truth. The hardest part was how they treated my mom. They'd invite her to parties, but really it was an invite to the kitchen. She was handed jobs like chopping onions, stacking plates, wiping counters, while the whole family lounged on leather chairs, sipping wine. If someone accidentally complimented a salad, "Oh, this is delicious," Judith would immediately point at my mom. She made it. More skilled than I expected. It sounded less like praise, and more like, wow, the dog can fetch a ball. Mom would usually smile, her "it's fine" smile. But at night, she'd massage her hands until the skin turned red, as if trying to erase the marks left by a wooden spoon. I saw it, and I stayed silent. Every time I was about to speak, Aaron would lean in and whisper, "Don't make a scene. They don't mean any harm." Oh, so no harm now means turning my mother into an unpaid maid? Little by little, I disappeared from myself. Friends stopped calling, partly because I always made excuses about being busy with events, and partly because Aaron suggested I stay away from my old friends who lacked ambition. I no longer had a job, no paycheck of my own, none of the things I used to like about myself. That feeling of being able to handle anything. Now the only thing I could handle was forcing a smile whenever someone said, "Oh, Savannah, you're so lucky." I knew I was slipping, but the real fall came when I discovered Aaron had a mistress. It was one of those nights he said he was working late with an intern at the office. My old instincts, PR people sniff out drama like bloodhounds, pushed me to check the event calendar. And sure enough, worst case scenario, he was out with a 24-year-old blonde bob-cut fresh hire, armed with a shiny dream of changing the world. I stared at the photo of them together and thought, oh, so Aaron enjoys mentoring in his own very special way. I waited for him to come home, my heart pounding like I was about to face a panel interview. When I showed him the picture, he didn't even deny it. He just shrugged. "You know, Savannah, the problem isn't me. The problem is you. You're not qualified to be the wife of a successful lawyer." That was the moment I understood gaslighting at a master's level. He was the one cheating, but somehow still made me believe it was my fault for not being sexy enough, ambitious enough, or good enough at keeping a husband. I remember smirking and asking, "Oh, so I'm supposed to thank you for only sleeping with an intern?" He glared at me like I'd just ruined the entire script he'd written. All I could think was, PR 101, whoever yells the loudest is usually the one in the wrong. And here, Aaron was the megaphone. Honestly, if I posted this story on Reddit, I know I'd get a flood of comments like, "Girl, run," or "Get your mom out now." Someone would probably even drop a 3-page essay on the psychology of powerful men. And I'd upvote every single one, because I've never needed an anonymous internet advisory board more than in that moment. 5 years of marriage, and I'd gone from a woman with a career and friends to a smiling accessory. From being Linda's daughter, the woman who worked night shifts yet still had the strength to hug me every morning, to being Aaron's wife, the man who treated control like a competitive sport. And now, knowing he had a mistress but still blamed me, I finally realized. The Brooks Castle wasn't a place I belonged. It was a trophy case I'd been locked inside, just so someone else could show me off. If finding out Aaron was cheating felt like a sucker punch from behind, then that anniversary party was a full-on blow to the face, public, deliberate, and with no way to dodge. Aaron raised his glass, standing in the center of the guests in his light-colored suit, smiling with the confidence of a man fresh off winning a $1 million case. His voice boomed, loud enough to hush the entire room. My mother-in-law looks like she just walked out of a high school cafeteria kitchen, right where she belongs. No knife could have cut deeper. And, as expected, the room erupted in laughter, spreading like the flu. The men nodded along, and the wives smirked as if to say, "Oh my God, hilarious." I looked at my mom, Linda, and saw her bite her lips so hard it bled. Red seeped through the cheap lipstick she'd carefully applied earlier that afternoon. I swear, if I could have picked a superpower right then, I would have gone full Hulk and hurled the entire dinner table off the balcony. This wasn't the first time they humiliated my mom, but it was the first time I felt my spine catch fire. After 5 years of silence, I finally heard my own voice rise as my chair scraped back with a long screech. "Enough, Aaron." The room froze. The lights still glowed, the background music still played, but you could hear the exact moment silverware stopped clinking against plates. Every eye locked on me, like I'd just stood up to object at someone else's wedding. My mom lifted her head, eyes wide in shock, while Judith arched an eyebrow as if she'd just discovered the family cat had learned to talk. Aaron set his glass down, his thin smile curling, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "Sit down, Savannah. Don't make a scene." If there had been a slow-motion camera, you'd have seen my eyes sweep the table. From Aaron's colleague pretending to adjust his napkin, to a wife whispering to her friend, back to my husband's stone-cold face. Never in my life had I wanted to scream, "Who here thinks this is normal?" Normal to who? More than I did in that moment. But instead of screaming, I chose another way. I lowered myself back into the chair, bowing my head like someone conceding defeat, while my hand slipped under the table to pull out my phone. My fingers trembled as I scrolled to the faded name in my contacts. Grayson. How many years had it been? 10? 12? He'd vanished as if Detroit itself was just a bad dream he wanted to erase. I'd never thought I'd call again. But right then, with my mom dabbing blood from her lip with a napkin, I knew there was no one else left to call. I typed quickly, "Grayson, if you're still alive, I need you now." I hit send. The screen lit up with "delivered" like some cruel joke. Honestly, I didn't expect anything. I wasn't even sure if the number still existed or if it had been recycled into a burner sim years ago. In my head, I mocked myself. Good luck, Savannah. Calling Batman would be easier than calling your missing brother. I slipped the phone away, forcing down the lump in my throat. The dining room roared with laughter again. Aaron cracking jokes like I'd just interrupted his stand-up set. Someone slapped the table. "Aaron, you really know how to tell a story." The whole crowd cackled in unison. I felt like a background character in a sitcom where the audience laughs on cue, no matter what the script actually says. I glanced at my mom. She was trying to sit up straight, her shoulders trembling slightly, her eyes unfocused like she wanted to vanish from the room altogether. Seeing that, I thought, if I posted this on Reddit, I'd get a flood of comments saying, "Girl, grab your mom and leave," and I'd upvote every single one. Just as that thought crossed my mind, the dining room door clicked open. A small sound, but in that space, it rang like the drum beat of an opening act. The door swung wide, a draft from the hallway lifting the silk curtains ever so slightly. Every head turned. I couldn't breathe. For a split second, I thought I was hallucinating. But no, the silhouette in the doorway was real, familiar. And the entire room, from the loudest laughers to the quietest onlookers, froze like statues in a museum. My heart pounded against my ribs. My phone was still warm in my sleeve. The message I'd sent, it hadn't disappeared into a black hole after all. Right there, in the middle of that party, the door opened. The iron gates swung open with a low note, and the front lawn lights blinked on in sequence, reflecting off the polished surface of a fleet of luxury cars pulling up. Tires squealed lightly, doors opened, leather shoes struck the stone walkway. From where I stood at the edge of the dining room, I watched a man step inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, a long coat draped over a perfectly tailored suit. The chandelier caught the line of his shoulders, casting an accidental halo. No one spoke, but the air rippled like the surface of a wine glass knocked too hard. Grayson Brooks. The name flashed through my head like a bold print headline. Gone was the boy with a torn backpack who'd left Detroit all those years ago. The man before me now was the CEO of an international investment firm, the name that filled primetime business news slots. I'd seen his face on magazine covers. Forbes dubbed him the market mover. But glossy photos never captured what was present in that room. A kind of silence that made everyone unconsciously sit straighter. My in-laws all went pale at once. Judith reacted with a smile as stiff as lacquer. "Oh my, Grayson, what an honor." Her voice dragged on the word honor like she was trying to drape velvet over barbed wire. Aaron stood next to me, his hand unconsciously tightening into a fist until the knuckles went white, though his lips stretched into that forced, cordial grin. What a surprise. How delightful. Grayson didn't answer right away. His gaze swept across the room like a man taking inventory of strangers in a house he used to own. Then his eyes landed on my mom, Linda, perched at the edge of her chair, trying to hold a smile after wiping blood from her lip. In the space of a single breath, his face softened. He walked straight toward her, bent down, and hugged her. Hugged her tight, like something long lost and suddenly, miraculously found in the last place you'd expect. "I'm here," he said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear. "I'm sorry I'm late." The whole room heard that word, son. The same people who'd been smirking minutes earlier suddenly switched to their family-first expressions, as if the director had just flipped the script. Judith gave 2 sparse claps. "How touching. A family reunion," she said, though her eyes stayed locked on Grayson like an equation she couldn't solve. "Why is he here?" Grayson released my mom and straightened up. Only then did he look at Aaron. "Did you forget who you married?" he asked, no need to raise his voice. "And do you know who you just humiliated in front of your guests?" The air dropped a degree colder. Aaron lifted his chin. "Don't misunderstand. We were just joking." "Joking," Grayson repeated, as if tasting something bitter. "I despise jokes that cost someone else their dignity." A second later, the hotel's tech crew wheeled in a massive screen. Someone fired up the projector, white light sweeping across the ceiling. I caught Judith rolling her eyes. Aaron snapped his head toward me, whispering, "Did you call them?" I shook my head. The truth was the world had called them, the world where everything comes with receipts, reports, headlines, event photos, not secret texts, not hidden recordings. Just a mountain of publicly available information no one had ever bothered to piece together. Grayson didn't have to lift a finger. He just nodded at the AV guy. The first slide lit up, a front-page shot from a local business paper. Attorney Aaron Brooks, and conflict of interest at the Yates Foundation, with a small subline, source, local press. The next slide rolled in, a string of event photos showing Aaron hand-in-hand with his legendary intern at various networking parties. Artfully blurry, glossy shots straight from event photographers, each stamped with Getty/Wire, all completely public. Following that came a timeline of cases Aaron's law firm had handled, suspiciously aligned with late-stage investment deals his friends profited from. At the bottom, the case numbers of regulatory inquiries already requesting explanations. "I like things that can be verified," Grayson said evenly. "These are all public documents and articles, not some high-tech leaks. Someone sent me the links last night." He paused, scanning the table. "Seems your generous colleague wanted you to learn a lesson about loyalty." A murmur rippled through the room, then popped like champagne bubbles. The men who'd been laughing the loudest now bent their heads, suddenly fascinated by their phones, pretending to check emails. One older woman clutched her chest with a faint gasp. "Oh my God." Judith shifted from her brittle smile to pressed lips, looking like a statue of Lady Justice tipped off balance. Aaron tried to flip on his lawyer mode. "These things, they're out of context. Everyone knows the media spins stories however they want." "Context, huh?" Grayson lifted a glass of water, watching the ripples shimmer. "Here's the context. You stood in front of me and my mother, turning us into a sideshow under the lights. And I chose to flip on the lights over the things you thought were hidden, when really they've been on the first page of Google this whole time." He set the glass down, eyes never leaving Aaron. "Another piece of context. That mentor-intern relationship you're so proud of? It looks a lot like a contract, lacking professionalism. And the proper authorities are already paying attention." A new slide appeared, a photo of an email header from a professional board announcing the opening of an ethics review, just the publicly released subject line, "No private correspondence." The next slide showed the public meeting schedule of a regulatory council, Aaron's name sitting neatly under the discussion column. In the corner was the logo of a local TV station, ticker scrolling beneath, "High-profile attorney under scrutiny for misconduct." No one laughed anymore. They call it dead silence, the kind that weighs on a room. I watched my mom exhale a long breath, like someone breaking the surface after being underwater too long. And Aaron? He looked smaller, like a racehorse suddenly realizing the track wasn't rubber, but rough stone. He turned to me, desperate to salvage something. "You believe me, don't you? You know me." "I know one thing," I answered slowly. "You're very good at picking a stage." Grayson turned to face everyone. "There's no such bargain here as dignity for free. From now on, any party celebrating the so-called Brooks legacy should begin by inviting this guest," he gestured to my mom, "to the seat of honor, not some chair shoved next to the kitchen." Then he looked straight at Judith, his tone polite enough to sting like satire. "I think you're smart enough to understand that, aren't you?" Judith drew in a breath, then forced out something that vaguely resembled, "Of course." But her hands kept twisting her wedding ring until it nearly slipped off. One guest, a retired judge, rose to his feet, clearing his throat. "I've got an early morning, excuse me." The domino effect kicked in. Chairs scraped back, toasts evaporated. The same people who'd applauded talk of knowing your place in the family were suddenly busy finding their own place at the exit. Aaron collapsed into his chair, like the last hiss from a leaking valve finally gone. Honor may be intangible, but when it shatters, it sounds like glass. He placed a hand on the edge of the table, eyes darting around for a friendly face. There were none. Judith edged half a step back, leaving a space small but unmistakable between her and her son. I stood there, not feeling some blazing victory, only the weight lifting from my lungs, lighter than air, the burden of keeping the peace I'd carried for 5 long years. Grayson turned back to Mom and pulled out a chair for her. "Tonight, you sit here." Then he looked at me, a small smile flickering like sunlight slipping through a crack in the curtains. "You too." He didn't need to add, "because we're family." He didn't have to. That hug earlier had already said it. I sat down, my hand squeezing hers under the table. That hand was still warm, even after surviving too many cold nights at the sewing factory. I no longer remembered Detroit by the smell of rusted steel, but by the scent of burnt-edged apple pie, memories that baked our poverty into something strangely filling. I lifted my head. The room had thinned out. The screen went dark. Staff wheeled it out the same way it had come in, quietly, professionally, without leaving behind a single scrap of paper. No one mentioned an apology. No one dared to toss out a casual "just a misunderstanding." The truth is, life rarely hands you a neat ending. Sometimes it just gives you a moment to rebalance. I finally understood. Respect isn't a dessert you serve when it's convenient. It's the bill for every relationship. And if you can't pay it, don't sit at the table. Real family is the one who pulls out a chair for your mother, not the rug from under her feet. And you don't need to defeat anyone to find peace. You just need to stand on the right side, the side of dignity. What about you? If you were in my place, would you choose to let it slide or draw the line right in the middle of the dinner table? Have you ever had to pick a side between fake harmony and the truth? Tell me in the comments. I'll read every word. Thank you all so much for supporting us through this journey.